Sunday's clash between Liverpool and Manchester United was a fascinating watch. It was excellent entertainment, but it was also a little bit stupid. Both teams were all over the place in this game, and particularly in the second half, both sides forewent any sense of tactical control for utter chaos. Arne Slot's side could have scored 3 or 4 goals in this game, there's no doubt about that. But that doesn't really mask the fact that there was complete lack of control from the Premier League champions. And in today's video, I want to explain why I don't think Liverpool have lost 4 games in a row because their forwards can't score goals and because the defenders can't stop conceding them, but because there's something between that's a little bit off. In other words, the Anfield side have lost all the balance that they had in previous years, and that right now is completely derailing their hopes of defending the Premier League title. Now, naturally, it'd be very easy to point to the notable drop-off from Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk this season and suggest that problems that Liverpool have at both ends of the pitch are down to these 2 players. But blaming this entire mess on individual performances at either end of the pitch feels to me like a red herring and one that's perhaps best ignored at this moment in time. Instead, I'm perhaps more interested in taking a look at the blame at Arne Slot's feet, or at least aimed towards the men higher above him in the club who went about dealing with the club's transfer activity in the summer transfer window. Understandably, Liverpool fans would point to the fact that they sold Darwin Núñez, Luis Diaz, Harvey Elliott went out on loan, and of course the tragic and untimely passing of Diogo Jota as need to sign new forward players, which is why they brought in Alexander Isak and Hugo Ekitike up front, and a new number 10 in Florian Wirtz. But amongst all this discussion about the players coming and going at Liverpool, I'd never really found any clear explanation as to how these players would fit into Arne Slot's starting 11, and crucially how these forward players would play alongside one another on the pitch. And this is really what made me think about what's gone wrong at Liverpool this season. Watching that striker Stramash unfold on Sunday, I was reminded of what made Jurgen Klopp's attack always work. They had Salah as the focal point on the right-hand side. Sadio Mane was the support striker, if you will, on the opposite wing. But in between all that, there's Roberto Firmino. And while the Brazilian never topped the charts for goals or assists while he was at the Anfield club, he covered the spaces between Mane and Salah perfectly, made spaces by pulling defenders out of position, but more importantly, he provided the balance between these 2 very gung-ho forwards. Following Liverpool's 3-2 win over Atletico Madrid in the Champions League back in 2021, Klopp actually explained why Firmino was so crucial to Liverpool's attack. As we can see in this quote, he goes on to explain what Firmino offered his team, but I think the really important thing here is this term here, offensive defender, not only because it perfectly describes Firmino's role for Liverpool, but it also points to what Slot's team are desperately missing this season. Over the course of his 8 seasons in the Premier League, Firmino averaged 0.47 tackles in the final third per 90 minutes, with that figure actually rising to a high of 0.91 in the 21-22 season. Mane, despite being better known as a goalscorer or playmaker, was also remarkably useful in Liverpool's attempts to defend from the front, and averaged 0.41 tackles in the final third per 90 during his time at Anfield. And when we compare those numbers to Liverpool's attacking players this season, we can quickly see why they have so many problems. When we pull up the top 10 Liverpool players for most tackles per 90 in the final third for this season and the previous 2 campaigns, we get a table like this one. Now hopefully, what becomes most apparent when you see this table is that the number of tackles being made deep within the opposition half has steadily fallen among these top players in the last 2 seasons. So much so that Liverpool actually only have 8 players who have registered tackles in the final third in this current league campaign. In Klopp's final season, he clearly weaponised Ryan Gravenberch and Alexis McAllister as his ball-winning midfielders, but we should also note that both Diaz and Núñez averaged impressive averages that were similar to what Firmino and Mane used to achieve in his previous teams. In Slot's first season, he also had the benefit of Núñez's closing down, alongside a preference to play Gakpo on the wing in place of Diaz, which also explains why the Dutchman's ridden so highly in the second season and why the Colombians dropped down to 0.22 tackles per 90 due to him playing as a false number 9. However, rather than focusing on the green scores, which admittedly show Wirtz and McAllister doing very well this season, we should note the diminishing number of beige scores and the rise of those kind of reddy pink scores from one season to the next. Not only is there a notable shift in Slot's first season away from players making tackles in the final third, but we also saw the likes of Salah, Dominic Szoboszlai and the aforementioned Diaz drop into concerning low averages last season. And now this season, to no great surprise, Slot seemingly only has 2 players among his entire midfield and attack putting up solid numbers for tackles in the final third. Now, of course, there are mitigating factors that we have to take into account here. The most obvious one is that Slot has struggled with that right back position For much of the season, we've seen Szoboszlai have to move back and fill in there rather than playing in midfield. And of course, we just simply can't ignore the fact there are so many new players at the club this season who are still trying to find their feet. Can we conclusively say that Slot has lost the plot after 8 games? No, of course we can't. But that doesn't mean we can't be concerned. And what's perhaps my biggest concern is that while Liverpool do have this impressive attacking array of players, there's no one really in that squad that I think Klopp would label as his best offensive defender. Now, obviously, Salah's not going to do it. Gakpo showed no signs of doing it. Ekitike is first and foremost a penalty box striker, and there's absolutely no chance that Liverpool broke the British transfer record to sign Alexander Isak, only to then turn him into some sort of final third water carrier. Interestingly enough, Federico Chiesa does actually stand out to me as a player who could play this selfish role in Liverpool's attack, but the fundamental issue there is that it would require Slot to drop one of the aforementioned stars that I mentioned there, and I just don't really see that happening. Ultimately, this all comes down to balance. Jurgen Klopp didn't get Liverpool to where they are now by cramming as many stars into his start 11 as the club's wage bill or transfer budget would allow. In many ways, the German tactician filled his teams with workhorses and preferred players that would run through brick walls for him over players that were perhaps technically more talented. And as a result, he bequeathed Slot a team that was well drilled and ready to challenge for the Premier League title. So I guess this season will undoubtedly show us whether Slot intends to stick with the tactics and systems that he inherited from Klopp, or whether he'll double down and do more of what we've seen so far this season until it begins to work. Maybe Liverpool can go on to win the Premier League or the Champions League with this system and tactics that accommodates 3 or 4 strikers on the pitch at any moment in time, but at this moment in time, Liverpool lack balance. They lack what Klopp referred to as an offensive defender, and as a result, they are a far cry from the team that won the Premier League last season.